Welcome everyone, my name is Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for joining us for this special series. We're talking to world leaders, global entrepreneurs, as well as CEOs, talking about their businesses, their strategies, and picking their brains about their tips on how you can succeed in the world of business. We're now joined by Jeremy Bassett. He is the founder of CUBED. He has lived in Australia, Singapore, as well as London. He's here in Mumbai to share his expertise with other folks at this conference. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So you're here to talk about how businesses can partner up with corporations, with startups. How did this idea come about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's off the back of a big trend that's happening where we're seeing most corporates are really struggling to grow, but you get this exponential growth happening in the startup ecosystem. And what we're seeing, what I saw from my 13 years at Unilever and what we see still today is, startups are disrupting every industry. And so it's vital that corporates of every industry are engaging with the startups that are disrupting their core business. And so what we do is we work with corporates to help them rethink how they can do innovation through collaborating with the startups.
Why are startups, they're really taken off, in most parts of the world. There's a hotbed here in India, certainly the Silicon Valley. You think about startups and, before you blink, there's so many startups that are just popping up. What is the reason for so much growth and success, especially in some of these markets?
Well, the reality is that all of the barriers to entry are coming down. So as big corporates that are built on barriers to entry, we're now, all those barriers are dropping. So whether it's production or media value or relationships with retailers, those barriers to entry are dropping down, and it's giving rise to a whole bunch of people that can set up their own business at a fraction of the cost or a fraction of the time that it traditionally would have cost them. And so you're seeing this wave of entrepreneurship happening, and India is absolutely no exception. You're a nation of entrepreneurs here, and so you see this huge amount of innovation happening in the startup ecosystem, and then that's backed up by a tremendous amount of funding. Last year, venture capital funds put 127 billion into the startup ecosystem. I mean, that's a huge amount of money that's going in. It's funding new growth opportunities, new innovations, and from my perspective, that's funding the future of most industries. And so it's vital that corporates are engaging in that ecosystem to look at, well, how can they be partnering with the startups that are reinventing their industry?
And let's talk about your organization. You started a few months ago. Let's talk about CUBED events. How did this idea come about?
Well, like I said, I was at Unilever for 13 years, and in the last 4 years, I put a proposal forward for something that we called the Unilever Foundry, which was Unilever's platform to engage in the startup ecosystem. And it was very simple. We would connect Unilever brands with innovative tech startups to help us pioneer the future of marketing. And CUBED is basically taking that capability and making it available for every corporate. So taking that experience of working with Unilever brands to bring innovation to the brands through the startups and making that available to corporates around the world.
How has brand integration, I think, changed over the years? We are growing up in such a different era than our previous generations. With social media and the digital world really taking such a sudden growth. Everybody's on their smartphone, their tablets. I mean, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, in terms of getting your brand out there and really connecting with the consumer, how important is that? And how has your firm? How do you guys sort of fit into that equation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Archit, because what we're seeing is there's like 14,000 different marketing and ad tech startups that exist around the world. So there are Instagram and Facebook and the big guys, obviously. But then you've got this long tail of innovative tech startups that brands can be partnering with to bring their brand to life in new and different ways. And so what we help to do is help to understand what's the brand strategy, who are they trying to reach, and therefore who are the best innovative tech startups that they could be working with to take their brand to the next level of engagement.
What are some things that you've noticed that perhaps corporations are not realizing? Maybe some of their lessons learned, some of their setbacks that other corporations could sort of learn from their mistakes to help them with their growth. What's your advice to some of those companies?
Yeah, I think for corporates operating in a world where you've got this massive amount of disruption happening in the startup ecosystem, the first lesson is it's important to realize you can't do it alone. So innovation is not coming from within corporates to the same extent that it is happening on the outside. And it's often not coming from traditional agency partners either. So you have to look outside of your four walls and outside of the four walls of your traditional partners. The second thing is you have to be far more experimental. So I think we've always talked about this idea of plan and perfect as big brands, and we're quite comfortable with that. But we're going into an era where change is happening much quicker, and we have to be far more experimental. It's much more about launch and learn rather than plan and perfect. And then the third thing I think that we have to realize is that consumers are becoming more and more segmented, and therefore we have to look at new, more innovative ways to reach them where they're at that point in time. And the new innovative tech startups that we're seeing can help you do that.
And perhaps maybe give us a success story. We've sort of talked about the lessons learned, a corporation that perhaps really encompassed those ideas and was able to use that to really stem growth.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples here is back from Unilever, actually. So we worked with a company called Alapic, and what they do is they help you curate content from social channels. So if you think about it, for brands wanting to operate in the social arena, you have to have a huge amount of content that we've never produced in the past. And what Alapic do is they actually go through people's Instagram feeds or social feeds, and they'll say, Archid, I love this picture of you drinking Lipton iced tea.
Right.
Can we use it?
That sounds about right, actually.
And then you'll say yes or no, and then that image then becomes something that Alapic will A/B test versus other images, and then they'll find the best Lipton iced tea drink picture, and then they'll put that back into their social feed. And we find that the interaction with Archid's content versus a branded content is much, much higher. And so, Alapic have helped us to find fantastic content for social feeds in a much more efficient way, which delivers growth and it delivers cost savings to the business.
Let's talk about India. You mentioned South Asia and India certainly being a hot market, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs and to the business world. Where exactly, in your opinion, does India sort of fit into the global spectrum? How are countries like the UK and around the world looking at India? What's the perception? What are some of the misconceptions? And how is India being viewed through the global eye?
Well, from my perspective, India, there's a huge amount of innovation happening in India. Right across India, not just Bangalore, for instance, but right across the country. And I think what's unique about India is, you've got a big population, also a big rural population, and the technology that's developed here is relevant right across Asia and in emerging markets around the world. And so, what we're seeing is, for companies wanting to reach rural consumers, there's a huge amount of technology that's been developed in India that can be used to reach those masses in other countries around the world as well. So that's very interesting from my perspective. And then you've got a huge amount of proper IT development happening, particularly around Bangalore, I guess, which is quite interesting for some of our bigger clients as well.
Let's hear about your story. We've heard about corporations, we've heard about some of the startups, we've heard about India. Let's hear about your story. Talk to us about your journey. Where did it start, and what made you, get into this line of work?
Well, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. So I'm off a dairy farm in eastern Victoria in Australia. We couldn't make enough money from the milk, so my uncle turned it into ice cream, and he had a very successful ice cream business for many years.
You milked it well.
He milked it well. I like that. It worked really well, and it instilled in me this idea of entrepreneurship. And so I've always had a passion for entrepreneurship. I joined Unilever, the world's biggest ice cream company, ironically, and always had a passion for how do you bring entrepreneurship to a corporate. And I worked in that line for many years. So I was an entrepreneur at Unilever, starting businesses for the company. And we really struggled to land anything that lasted within the corporate. And I learned a huge amount from that experience. I learned that although corporates have scale, it's very difficult to be entrepreneurial within that environment. We're great at scale, but not great at the early stage of startup innovation. And so the other thing I learned is that startups are inventing the future, and it's not really up to corporates to build those businesses. It's up to corporates to realize that those businesses already exist and to help them to scale up. And so that's what got me into this space of open innovation, or collaborative innovation, if you like. We then launched the Foundry, and then off the back of that decided, this opportunity is so great, and it doesn't just belong in Unilever. It belongs with corporates right around the world. And so the opportunity there was to help other corporates go on this same journey, and that's what I'm pursuing now.
We wish you the very best of luck. And as we wrap it up, I want to ask you a quick final sort of a closing comment. Your advice to those who are leaders or those who are in the world of business. What are some things that you think are the keys to success, especially in the business world, in terms of leadership and tricks of the trade from your experience?
Well, I think in today's environment, it doesn't matter if you're in corporate or in startup. Having an entrepreneurial approach has never been more important. The world is just moving at an unprecedented rate of change, and we have to keep up with that, and entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurial approach is the only way to do that. So that would be my number one tip. I think off the back of that, this idea of experimentation, of failing fast, of iterating, learning and changing, there's never been a more important time to experiment. And then the third thing I'd say is just have a go. I mean, don't overthink it. It's been an amazing journey for me moving into the startup land and moving out of corporate. I think if you're interested in entrepreneurship and wanting to make that move from corporate to entrepreneurship, there's no good time for this, right? It's sort of like having a baby. You just have to jump in and have a go. So if you're thinking about making the move into startup land, just do it.
All right, our pleasure. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. That was Jeremy Bassett giving his perspective, his insights, as well as some of his advice he is presenting in Mumbai to other business entrepreneurs and leaders having worked both in the corporate as well as the startup spectrum. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for watching.
Very warm welcome. It's a very interesting time to be alive, given the kind of opportunities and challenges that the social media sphere really brings up. It throws open a lot of doors, but also a lot of roadblocks. And every person has the potential to go viral. That's what Culture Machine really strongly believes in. Let's talk a little bit further about what they really do and how social media has really changed the landscape. Sameer Pitawala, co-founder and CEO of Culture Machine, joining us. Thanks very much, Sameer. What, according to you, has social media really done to actually change the landscape of how we really view news and how we really look at the interpretation of what's really going viral?
Thanks, Molly, for having me. There's roughly about 400 million millennials in India right now, making us the largest, youngest population in the world. These are projected to go to about 500 million in the next 3 years, and these 500 million audiences will be spending $320 billion. They also happen to be 50% of the working force population, and 70% of them actually take care of their own household. They actually run their houses, so they contribute a majority to the household income. So when you look at the taste preferences and where they spend their time, this is essentially on their mobile phones and on social media platforms. All social has turned to video. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram are the new Tata Skies and Dish TVs.
Even for news, we've seen
for news.
Yeah.
In fact, the latest Reuters study, which was done on news consumption, said that all millennials, the first port of call where they get their news from is social media. And all of this is video. So the way we look at it is YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram are the new Tata Skies and Dish TVs. And if they are the new Tata Skies and Dish TVs, we are building sort of the media network, the Z's or the stars on the back of these platforms.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about how, according to you, are these challenges really going to worsen or improve given the kind of potential that social media has in a country like ours?
I think the challenges are only going to worsen because there's a lot more fragmentation. If you dial back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was only YouTube as a video platform in the country. 2 years ago, Facebook launched video and has grown dramatically. If you look at the new report that we have released, it has now 58% of all video users are watching video on Facebook as well. So it's been a dramatic increase in terms of video consumption, not just on Facebook, but also now on Instagram. WhatsApp is sort of like the place where there's dark matter of video, where so many people sharing video. Obviously, statistics are not available, but one assumes it's billions of views just being in terms of videos being shared on WhatsApp.
Sure.
And this does not include new platforms like UC browser, which is a very popular web browser, videos being watched on those. Messaging platforms like Hike or Facebook Messenger again are very large when it comes to shareability in terms of video content.
Sure.
And this is just the advertising supported ones. I'm not even talking about the subscription ones like Netflix, Amazon and all the others which have come up. So I do believe that inherently, as the pipes have become capable of supporting higher bandwidth quality and also in terms of content originally on these platforms has grown, there's an explosion in terms of consumption in the country, and the new genres being created only for these platforms in terms of content and programming.
What are Indians watching the most on YouTube?
If you look at our recent study, entertainment and comedy are generally what's working, but that's changing now really rapidly.
No
New
surprises
genres,
there.
no surprises there. I also believe that it's a lot to do with the way that television has been heavily regulated in the country due to INB guidelines. So what's happening is genres which are able to speak out and speak openly tend to flourish on platforms like digital, where there is not really any regulation, thankfully so.
Sure.
But the other genres have really grown dramatically. When you look at education in general, entertainment, while it has been big, education has been sort of a dark horse. It has billions of views generated, especially in terms of preschool content.
That's
you have news, which is growing fundamentally because of the rise of the internet in local languages. You have regional news products doing phenomenally well. So education, cooking and food in general tend to be really large genres because they have long lifespans in terms of content, but also because there's so much of innovation happening right now on digital video in genres like cooking and food. Science and technology, while small, are growing really rapidly because a lot of people are looking at the internet to watch content in those formats to understand what's the latest, whether it's from making decisions and buying gadgets to television sets to just knowing about what's happening in the world of technology. So pretty much every genre is growing dramatically. Entertainment and comedy are still large. Music obviously has been one of the biggest in general, if not bigger than entertainment, but one doesn't talk about it because it's assumed that it's a part of the fabric of video. But yeah, I mean, besides the top three obvious ones, all these other genres are growing at a rapid pace.
Do you see social media overshadowing the traditional forms of media in the time to come?
I think they will inherently,
or digital media for that matter.
I think it's pretty much fait accompli. If you read, it's the things which are inevitabilities in technology. Television serves broad audiences broadly. I think what digital does is serve some audiences broadly. So you're able to actually literally personalize media and do it at a scale unimaginable because of television's constraints technologically.
Right.
So if you have an experience which is personalized for you, you have video content and you have a EPG personalized for your taste buds. You only get delivered programming which you like, and it's filtered algorithmically for you. I think that's a much better experience than watching a general consensus programming around a television set. I think that's exactly what's happening, where the television set is now being converted into just another display, large display in the living room.
Right.
And platforms like platforms like whether it's YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, Facebook are customizing video depending on your taste buds, so that your experience in the living room is personalized. So it's pretty much, I think, the way technology is going to shape consumption. It's an inevitability. One doesn't know whether it's going to happen now or the next 10 years, but video over IP seems to be the only way that this can progress.
Absolutely, and given the kind of trends that we are already looking at when it comes to online
news, or you look at
yes,
genres like those which have just changed dramatically with the advent, and more so now, I think as the internet has moved towards becoming capable of supporting higher and higher quality of video and higher quantums of video, genres like news, I think, especially on traditional television, are in for some serious amount of competition, because you don't really need breaking news when there's nothing faster than social platforms. It's I think authenticity comes and plays a big part in genres like news, but there's no reason why today television news channels don't look at them as television news channels. They look at themselves as news companies, regardless of platform.
Let's take a step back at the macro level. How prominently, according to you, does India feature on the global social media space? We do know India is a huge market, but it comes with a lot of challenges.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, India has always featured amongst the top 3 markets for any of these platforms, whether it's Facebook, YouTube or Instagram. In general, over the last 6 to 7 years, it's pretty much been a part of the top 5 platforms, interchangeably between Brazil, which has always been sort of the competition for India in terms of consumption. With the advent of 4G, consumption has blown up. The reason being that there's a very new kind of audience who just come outside of the metros, who has come online for the first time. So that's truly changed the game in terms of the way platforms in general look at India. The challenge, however, has been the amount of digital spending in the country. And it's no fault, to be honest, of marketeers, because I think audience consumption changes faster than advertisers change perceptions.
Yes.
So what's happened is that everyone knows, right from Instagram to a Facebook to a YouTube knows, and a Twitter knows how important this market is because of the sheer scale of it. The flip side of it is that while the volumes are there in terms of audiences, they're not there in terms of monies yet. So that's why it tends to be sort of schizophrenic, where it's important for audience acquisition, but not really a material market for them in terms of their bottom lines or the top lines.
Also looking at the demographics, have things changed when it comes to the millennial versus the other categories consumption? Has there been a shift in any manner when it comes to their digital media consumption?
Generally, 18 to 35, which is looked at sort of the core millennial audience, which is on the internet, tends to be endemic consumers, which means that they consume 7 to 10 times more content than any other age group. By that I mean older than 35. Right, so younger than 18, obviously these are even more endemic than the 18 to 35-year-olds, and their patterns tend to be even more indulgent. But generally 18 to 35 tend to consume the most. More importantly, I think the one key statistic one should look at is the internet in India is heavily male skewed, and I think that's something which should change as more and more women come online.
How is it male skewed?
Because of just, I mean, reasons are many. One is also because data has been so far an expensive commodity in order to purchase. Mobile phones, again, I mean, it's a much more complex, ecosystem to look at holistically, because it looks at whether, how many women can afford high-end handsets or smartphones, because they're not necessarily the primary earners. So it tends to be that the men tend to have, handphones. In urban societies, no, but in terms of tier 2 and tier 3 city towns, if you look at recent studies done including by BCG, it says that most women who are going to come online in the ensuing years are still mostly going to be from urban societies as opposed to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, towns and villages. And I think it's a twofold thing. Obviously, data connectivity, pricing cost drop along with handset prices dropping will allow more of this demographic to come on board. But the other challenge is also great quality content. There's not enough of it focused around women, unlike television.
All right, also coming to the issue of the menace of terrorism, since you've been born and brought up in Mumbai, it's witnessed a number of attacks. We are looking at terrorism becoming a global menace. But when it comes to the social media aspect of how we're looking at terrorism as an issue really being tackled, do you think social media, in a way, be it even the digital media, really improves things or makes it more challenging? For example, when it comes to the videos that are being shared on social media, do you think that creates more panic, or do you think that actually helps the cause?
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and I think there's nothing which talks about that in more accurate detail than the internet, where all forms of perception are equally welcomed by an algorithm, except that some perceptions win over others because of what gets shared and what gets viewed. I think the challenge with our technology universe that we live in is that it can create an echo chamber, where if you hold a certain thought and belief, that thought and belief gets perpetuated depending on what gets shared by your immediate peers. So I think that the challenges that can, I believe, accelerate a certain kind of perception which may be misplaced, and in certain cases it can put out content which is not even true gets shared. I mean, recently we saw that happening with a renowned author, and there are upteen examples of content which actually helps improve humanity and also helps degrade it. So I believe the internet as a platform is neutral. It's a force of nature. We use it to generate electricity or use it to burn down houses. It depends on how people use it.
Very aptly summarized. Thank you very much for your time, Sameer Pitilwala, and wishing you all the very best.
Thank you, Molly, for having me.